Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why sometimes the more you try to get ahead, the further behind you seem to fall, especially when others are doing so well? This new study dives deep into how we learn from each other, and when that copying actually hurts us, making things worse for most people and increasing the gap between the rich and the poor. Imagine you are trying to make a financial investment or navigate a new job. You look at your own past successes and failures, but you also watch what other people are doing and what happens to them. Usually, we think learning from others is a good thing. It is supposed to help us learn faster and make better choices than if we just relied on ourselves. For a long time, scientists assumed decision outcomes were like separate events. You win some. You lose some, and one win or loss doesn't much affect the next. But here is the twist this research tackles. In lots of real-life situations, outcomes aren't independent. Think about investing. The more money you have, the more you can invest, and the bigger your potential gains or losses. Or think about your career. Early successes can open doors, leading to more opportunities, creating a rich get richer scenario. This is called multiplicative growth. Your earnings this year multiplied by your success or failure in the market determines next year's starting point. So, the big question this paper asks is, when outcomes depend on past success in this multiplicative way, does learning from others still help us, or does it actually make things worse? And how does this affect how unequal societies become? To figure this out, the researchers built a clever computer simulation. They created virtual agents or people. These agents had to make repeated choices between a safer option with lower rewards and a riskier option with higher potential rewards, but also a higher chance of big losses. Crucially, these agents weren't just learning from their own experiences. They could also learn from what other agents did and what happened to them. And here is the surprising main finding in environments where outcomes built on each other multiplicatively. Like our investment example, most forms of social learning actually made decisions worse for the average person compared to just learning on their own. It didn't just fail to help, it actively misled people. How did this happen? Well, in these rich get richer systems, a small group of agents might get lucky early on because the outcomes are multiplicative. This initial luck can snowball. These fortunate few might consistently choose the riskier option and, by chance, do well, when other agents see these wealthy, risk-taking individuals succeeding. They naturally assume it is because of skill or a good strategy. They start copying them, but they're copying luck, not skill. The researchers tested different ways people copy each other. They looked at learning from the most successful individuals, which they called payoff bias learning. This is usually thought to be smart, as you'd want to copy the best. But in this multiplicative world, it backfired. It led agents to copy the lucky ones, pushing them towards the risky option and making their own outcomes worse. The one strategy that actually helped a bit was conformity bias learning. This means copying what the majority of people are doing. Since the majority in this lucky-driven system were actually doing worse by trying to emulate the successful few, the conformist learners tended to stick to the safer, less risky option, which was actually the better long-term strategy. They even accounted for how people might adjust their thinking. They made sure their virtual agents were trying to make the best possible long-term decision, which in these multiplicative systems means focusing on the long-term growth rate, not just the average reward. Even with this optimal thinking, social learning often backfired. Let's dig into the details a bit more. First, they looked at how individuals learned on their own. In the additive environment, where outcomes don't add up, they saw the hot stove effect. This is where a bad early experience with a riskier option makes you overly cautious. Even if that option is better on average in the long run, people tended to stick to the safer, but ultimately worse, option. In the multiplicative environment, however, this hot stove effect actually helped, because the riskier option had a negative long-term growth rate. Being scared off by a bad early experience was a good thing. Now, when they introduced social learning into the additive environment, it was great. Copying others, especially the most successful ones, really boosted performance. It helped overcome that hot stove effect and guided people to the better, riskier option. But in the multiplicative environment, it was the opposite story. Unbiased social learning, just copying what others did, made people slightly more likely to choose the suboptimal risky option because they were influenced by those few lucky risk takers. Payoff bias learning, which is supposed to be so smart, was even worse. It pushed people towards the risky option even more. The researchers explained this might be because it reduced the helpful caution that came from the hot stove effect in individual learning. Wealth bias learning, where you copy the richest people, was the absolute worst. This makes sense because wealth in these systems is a mix of actual skill and a lot of luck. When you copy the wealthy, you are more likely to be copying their luck, which is misleading. The shining star, or at least the least damaging, was conformity bias learning. This means following the majority. in this lucky-driven system, the fortunate few who were succeeding with the risky option were outliers. By following the majority who were more likely to be sticking to the safer option, or were not as influenced by the lucky few, conformist learners were steered away from the risky, suboptimal choice. And what about population size? They found that in the multiplicative environment, as the population grew, wealth-biased learning became even more detrimental. More people meant a higher chance of extremely lucky trajectories, making the misleading signal even stronger. Finally, let's talk about inequality. In the additive environment, inequality was low and social learning even reduced it. But in the multiplicative environment, it was a different story. Social learning, except for conformity, consistently led to higher inequality. The strategies that pushed people towards the risky option, especially wealth bias, created wider gaps between the richest and poorest. So, what does this all mean for us? For a long time, we've celebrated learning from successful people. We see someone do well, and we want to know their secret, assuming their success is due to skill. But this research shows that in systems where outcomes build on each other, like wealth or long-term career progression, luck plays a huge role. When we copy the successful, we might just be copying their good fortune, which can lead us down a path to worse outcomes. The rich get richer dynamic isn't always about skill. It is often amplified by luck. This study highlights a critical caveat for social learning. While it is great in many situations in certain contexts, especially those with multiplicative growth, it can become a source of systemic bias, leading to worse performance for most and widening social and economic divides. It suggests that sometimes ignoring the seemingly successful outliers and following the crowd, or simply learning from your own carefully managed experiences, might be the smarter long-term strategy. Now, like all studies, this one has its limitations. They ran simulations, which are simplified models of reality. For instance, they assumed that luck was uncorrelated between individuals. In the real world, things like economic shocks or environmental events can affect many people at once, making luck more correlated. However, they did check this, and the main findings mostly held up. They also focused on extreme additive and multiplicative scenarios, and real-world situations are often a mix. But the core message is powerful. When success breeds more success in a multiplicative way, our instinct to copy the winners can actually be a road to ruin for the majority. The best strategy might not be copying the richest or most successful, but rather adopting a more conservative approach, especially if you are learning from cumulative outcomes. This research really makes you rethink who to learn from and when. It suggests that in many aspects of life where outcomes compound, relying too heavily on social cues from successful individuals might actually be a disadvantage for most of us, and a driver of inequality. What do you all think about these findings? Have you ever experienced the rich get richer scenario where luck seemed to play a bigger role than skill? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained simply. And hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the fascinating world of the human mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.